Welcome to my Accent is No Accident podcast. I'm your host, Maritza Perez. Our guest today is a man whose own experience with grief, combined with his professional expertise, is helping others who have experienced the loss of a loved one. He is David J. Roberts, Master of Social Work and Licensed Master Social Worker. Became a parent who experienced the transition of a child when his 18-year-old daughter, Janine, died of cancer on March 1st, 2003. He is a retired addiction professional and adjunct professor in the Psychology Child Life Department at Utica University in Utica, New York, and a workshop presenter and a speaker. He is the host of Teaching Journeys podcast, which can be found on most podcast platforms. Dave co-authored a book with Reverend Patty Furino titled When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister, which was published March 1st, 2021. David, welcome. It is an honor to have you with us today.
Maritza, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation for some time now.
Yes, yes. We had our preliminary conversation, and I was looking forward for this one too. But before we get into all this, I would like to ask you our first question and theme question of our podcast. David, what is your accent and why is not an accident?
Well, my accent is I live in upstate New York in a little town called Whitesboro, New York, which is about 50 minutes to an hour from Syracuse, New York. We're kind of right in between Syracuse and Albany, New York. A lot of people will mistake my accent for a New York City accent, but I live actually 5 hours northwest from New York City in upstate. Um, it's interesting. A lot of people, depending on how I do my inflection, some people will think I'm from Massachusetts. Other people will think I'm from, like New York City, the Bronx. But my accent is no accent, and it's an upstate New York accent with a little bit of probably downstate and maybe a little bit of Massachusetts mixed in. But I think my accent might be a product of probably just all the experiences I've had in my 69 years of living so far.
Yes. And then your professional impressive as well. You have been a professor of psychology in Utica, New York, which is, I believe, psychology and teaching
Mhm.
are two of the most wonderful professions that we have. Tell me a little bit about that. How was that experience?
Well, first of all, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit because in the introduction you mentioned that I was a retired addictions counselor, and it was no accident that I got into addictions. It was a field that I think found me as opposed to me finding it. I actually developed a love for working with individuals with use issues when I was working at a previous job as a youth employment counselor for a local agency in Utica. I connected with an addictions agency, did some actually job skills training with some of their clients, and really liked working with that population. And eventually, I got into outpatient addictions counseling and then inpatient for a state-run facility in New York State. And a lot of what I learned, my bachelor's degree is from Utica University in psychology, and a lot of what I learned in psychology in terms of creating space for individuals, doing counseling, comes specifically from my psychology background. So that was a nice marriage. Um, in my job, I found that I was doing training with staff, a lot of in-service training. And after I got my master's degree in social work in 2002, um, I wanted to embrace teaching a little bit. And I applied to a lot of local universities, but Utica University, that was then Utica College, was the only college university that got in touch with me. And it turned out to be my alma mater. And I started working part-time, and I still am part-time. I started there in January 2003. And I believe the universe kind of lays the groundwork for a plan that we have, no conception of, but that the Utica University community needed to be in place for me to work through the and be for them to be supportive of me initially after my daughter's transition from this world, because she transitioned March 1st, 2003. I started at Utica University January 22nd, 2003. So that community
Oh,
was in place for me. The students, the staff, they just showed me their love, their respect, their compassion, and that got me through a lot of dark days. So, and now my teaching has evolved where I teach 3 to 4 classes a semester. Um, I teach now care of the human spirit, death, dying, and bereavement, and impact of addiction on children and families. But I've taught several courses in the past for the G and now the psychology child life department. So, um, like addictions, Maritza, uh, my academic career kind of chose me. The college that I was to teach in chose me as opposed to me choosing it.
yeah.
And as it turns out, I needed to have that community in place to help me get through some very, very challenging early days of my grief.
Yes, I see that. And I mean, that is where we find out that not everything is a coincidence, and um, everything is putting for what you need and putting the path.
Yeah.
Um, I was listening to a couple of the interviews you've had before, and the description, first of all, losing a child is an incredible pain that nobody will imagine, because you're supposed in your head, in your mind, you're supposed to live first.
Hmm.
Um, and your daughter was 18 years old, which was a very early age for a child, one of your children to pass, right? With your children to pass. So with that said, I would like you to tell us that experience from, because what I like of what you talk about is how she transitioned, and we're not talking about she's no longer with us.
Hmm.
I love the way you put it. Talk us a little about this transition.
Well, I never always looked at death as a transition from the physical body into the spiritual. I think I was too consumed in early grief to look much beyond my own pain. Um, I can give you, Maritza, if it's okay, a little bit of the backstory in terms of how she got
Yes.
cancer, and I'll keep the condensed version. Um, in September of 2001, my daughter and her significant other came to see me and informed me that they were pregnant. And so Janine was going to give birth to, and she did give birth to her my first grandchild. Her name is Brianna, and Brianna is now 22 years old. But the story with that is that Janine injured her foot in a freak accident very early in her pregnancy. And anything that they tried to do to treat her foot, whether it was elevation, whether it was a walking boot, nothing, nothing worked. Her podiatrist wanted to do an MRI of her foot to see what was going on since it wasn't responding to treatment. And this was in April of 2002. But my daughter, Janine, refused to have it done only because she did not want to jeopardize the birth of her child. And on May 2nd, 2002, Brianna Lee was her middle name is Lee. Brianna Lee was born. Um, and shortly thereafter that, they did an MRI, found an undefined 8 centimeter mass at the bottom of her foot. They biopsied it probably, I think, May 19th, I believe was the date. Um, and they found the biopsy was highly suggestive of cancer. The diagnosis was confirmed on May 26th. She by a local oncologist who said that she had a type of cancer called the velar rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a very rare and aggressive connective muscle tissue cancer. We went to the Dana-Farber Research Institute and Hospital in Boston because they deal with pediatric sarcomas. They're one of the best in the country, if not the world, pediatric sarcoma treatment and research. They told us that she had a stage 4 tumor with bone marrow and lymph node involvement, and there was no cure for her cancer. The only hope that we would have was to put her cancer into remission until they could find a cure. So what I heard, what my daughter heard, and what her significant other heard, and my wife heard, was that unless there's a miracle, your daughter's going to die. And
Yeah.
I looked at the 5-year survival rates, Maritza, for her type of cancer. It was anywhere from 10 to 15%, depending on which research study you looked at. So there was an 85 to 90% chance that she was going to die, or as I call transition, within a 5-year period. And 10 months from the day that she was diagnosed, and with hospice services, she transitioned into a new existence. And just to show your viewers how life can turn on a dime. I celebrated the birth of my grandchild on May 2nd. First grandchild was celebrating being a grandparent and with all the perks. May 19th, my degree, my MSW degree from SUNY Albany, State University of New York at Albany, was conferred. And on May 26th, I found out that I had a child with a terminal illness. June 2nd, I found out that in all likelihood she was going to die unless they found a cure. So you're going to talk in a month period of time. I went from the joy and exhilaration of being a grandparent to completing one of my educational goals that was 25 years in the making to now being a parent, being thrown into a world that all my training, um, all of my background, all my education, all my work with clients, they didn't remotely prepare me for it. Because as you mentioned earlier, there isn't a playbook that we can use to say this is how you deal with life after you bury one of your children, because it's an unnatural occurrence. A parent is not supposed to carry the legacy of the child. Their children are supposed to carry the legacy of the parent. So
Yeah.
everything was just totally mixed up. The world that I knew that was predictable, safe, and controllable became terrifying, very difficult to navigate and uncertain. And that
I
was
can,
that was during her illness and then after her
yes.
transition.
So, and it was like meant to be that she had a pregnancy so early because I mean that kind of like also gave all of you a motive to keep
Hmm.
on, going with her legacy, which was her child.
Well, and certainly what happened after she was diagnosed, her significant other, um, Janine, Brianna, their cat moved in with my 2 boys, uh, my daughter Janine, and my wife Sherry, and my 2 boys are Dan and Matt, by the way. Um, and they moved in with us in this. We live in a very single level ranch home, and so it was a tight fit, but we all made it
Mhm.
work. And after Janine transitioned, her significant other, Steve, stayed with us for 4 years until Brianna was ready for kindergarten. Then he went off on his own, got married, but we never lost contact with her. He made sure that we saw her regularly. So for that, we're very grateful for. I mean, he had a sense of responsibility that belied his. At the time, he was 19 years old when Janine was sick. Um,
Mhm.
got sick and got diagnosed, and his sense of responsibility just belied his 19 years. He had a very deep sense of responsibility and a deep sense of maturity.
And yes, at such an early age, also for him, and all of you involved was a loss that was very, very impactful. Um, I believe what you said, everybody prepares you for many things, and we all know that we're going to lose somebody that we love at one point. But there are some loss that you just don't expect. Um, even when you lose your parents,
Yep.
um, it comes as a surprise. Um, but yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say any of the things that sometimes will happen, and I don't want this to happen, is that when somebody knows that I've experienced a transition of a child, automatically for some people in their mind, they think that minimizes their own personal tragedies. Well, geez, I can't imagine what it's like losing a child. I just lost a parent. But the way I look at it is that we need to be, as grief coaches, as bereavement support specialists, we need to be able to take our worst pain, regardless of what that loss is, tap into that and be able to empathize and meet somebody at the point of their worst tragedy, even if their worst tragedy is different than ours. My worst tragedy was the loss of a child, of a child. Your worst tragedy for you, Maritza could have been a loss of a parent, but that doesn't minimize your loss any less
Yes,
than. And in my mind, because what we mourn is the loss of that relationship, the loss of their physical presence. And if that's your worst tragedy, I'm going to tap into the pain of mine and meet you there without minimizing the loss that you've had or thinking that your loss has to be minimized because in your head, mine may be greater. And
yes,
tragedy is tragedy.
exactly. And there is no book that can prepare us for this.
No.
There is nothing written that can really prepare us for this. It's unimaginable. Like we live to survive.
Hmm.
So so that and let's call like we call it like you're calling it transitioning. It's something that we know of, but we never think of. So with with your experience and your knowledge, was it easier or was it kind of like more difficult because then you became the supporter to others?
Um, Initially, it was difficult because I was consumed with my own raw pain of grief. And thankfully, I had an employer who gave me some flexibility in work duties. Um, I was seeing a psychiatrist at the time for something else. I had some other grief issues that had come up as a result of the loss of a dear friend and the loss and transition of a dear friend and the transition of my mother. And that had come up when I was doing my second year field placement at a skilled care nursing facility. And I was talking with the psychiatrist who was a very, very good therapist. He wasn't one that would prescribe meds. He wanted to do therapy with me. I told him about my daughter's illness. First thing he said to me is he goes, David, our needs now have changed to more practical considerations. So he he wrote me up with an adjustment disorder diagnosis so I could take my sick leave to be with my family for as long as I could, which turned out to be 3 months. That I was with Janine during her illness and with my family. And then he also recommended flexibility in work duties, where instead of doing supervisory or administrative work, I would just do case management duties. So the professional part of it, I could do case management duties. I was on kind of like automatic pilot with that, and it gave me some structure, while at the same time living the human experience of trying to figure out how I'm going to navigate a world without, my only daughter not present. And then about I started gradually making a decision, probably within the 3 years, to try to find some meaning and re-engage in life with purpose. And I was doing everything I think Maritza, anybody who's experienced a loss in the beginning would do. I was starting to um, do some workshops. I was starting to write a little bit. I was do some bereavement support with individuals. And for 7 years it worked. I was also part of organizing conferences, grief conferences in my area. So I was doing what I think anybody in that initial phase of grief would be doing. I was reading, I was trying to find out information from other parents who had experienced a transition of a child who were longer in the journey than I was to try to figure out, okay, what tools did they use that I could incorporate? And then you mentioned earlier about coincidence. I've thrown coincidence out of my vocabulary. And 7 years after Janine transitioned, through pure serendipity, I met an interfaith minister from Long Island by the name of Patty Farina. And I met Patty through, she wanted to attend a conference that I was organizing. It was called Beyond Words, um, creative, creative approaches to handling grief or something to that effect. Um, and she had registered, all registration was online. So she did her workshop, she double checked her info, hit submit, the computer screen went black. And so she couldn't register. So she saw the number, which was my number at the end if there was registration issues, and she called me. We look back on that now, and if that computer it was divine intervention that her computer went out at the time it did, because it never would have connected us initially.
Yes.
So we had a 45-minute conversation. I asked her if she had lost a child, and she said no. And I told her about Janine. We talked for about 45 minutes. But she did tell me that she was volunteering as an interfaith minister for the Angel of Hope in Long Island. And the Angel of Hope is a statue which is erected in honor of children who have transitioned. And so she was doing work with the parents there. So to fast forward, in September, she came to the conference. Prior to that, she had asked me, "Do you believe in science?" And I said, I really don't give a lot of credence to science. I don't believe in that type of thing. I'm more science-based. I'm rational-based. But I said in 2009, I think it'd send me a double rainbow. And it wasn't, Maritza, that I believe in science. I don't think it was. There were some things that were happening to me that science couldn't explain, but I couldn't figure out what to do. So after the conference, she goes, "Daughter sent me a double rainbow." And I'm thinking, okay. I was so tired and I just took it with a grain of, but as it turned out, that was another sign that we were soon to get together. So she told me if I ever get to Long Island, she would like her husband and she would show me her Long Island. So fast forward to November of 2010, there was a workshop that I wanted to attend. Patty was working the event. I went to the event, stayed with her in that weekend. The weekend in November 10th at 9:30 at her house was the beginning of a spiritually transformative weekend, which convinced me daughter's consciousness was alive and well, that I could connect with her at any time, and this anytime I wanted to, and she could connect with me, that she was never that far away. And also in the subsequent conversations, 10-year marathon conversations and continued marathon conversations that we have, Patty exposed me to some spiritual practices, techniques that could coexist quite nicely and integrate with my science-based background to help me get a greater understanding of my role, my myself, and also the behavior of others. And the importance of critical thinking. For 10 years, I tried to talk to her, said, we ought to write a book about what you did for me. We ought to write a book about our conversations. And finally, after 10 years of me bringing it up during the pandemic in 2020, we decided we were going to write When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. And we launched publication of the book, or we launched the book release on March 1st, 2021. And March 1st is my daughter's day to transition. And we did that purposely. So, um, and so that's how, I had other people along the way who were planting seeds. But if you look at the best chocolate sundae that you've ever had with homemade whipped cream, and hopefully I'm making all your viewers and listeners hungry for dessert, cherry was, or Patty was the perfect cherry that topped everything off. That just exposed me to another perspective that not only jump started some spiritual awareness and growth, but also allowed me to find peace with my daughter's transition. Now, by finding peace, it doesn't mean that I still don't have days where I yearn for her physical presence. I do, but I just understand now that that's part of the human experience. And I always go to the fact that she's not that far away. And when I'm feeling that way, I'll try to, I'll talk with her, connect with her, bring up some positive memories. And for there, that bond is always going to last until I join her in eternity, until it's my time to transition.
Yes. And it is a beautiful story with so many connections. And I love the way you're saying how you met Patty and how she told you, do you believe in signs? Because many times I do, but many times we're kind of like and deaf to them.
Mm-hmm.
We're so occupied on our own path and our own doings that the to-do list, the next thing that we have to do, the next place we have to go, um, what is next in our schedule, that we miss,
Yep.
but they are always there.
And, I think the other thing too, Maritza, we get so consumed with our own grief and the pain of grief that our vibrational energies are so low that we may experience the sign, but we're not attuned to that because we're so consumed with what's going on with ourselves. And rightfully so, in the early stage of grief, it's got to hurt. We have to be able to feel the pain and to move forward through it and to move through it. We have to be able to, if we try to suppress it.
Hi, I'm very happy to know you are here watching our podcast today. It is an honor to be featuring so many entrepreneurs on the journeys of their inside voice, their accent that is not an accident. And we want to reach out more people like you who are creating a better world of diversity, inclusiveness, equity, and belonging. So please take a moment to hit the subscribe button below, like, and share to others. And even if you want to leave a comment, that'll be nice. Thank you for your support. And now back to the episode. Um, you remind me of something. I'm just going to tell the story. When I was dating my husband, I was not very sure because I divorced and I wasn't sure whether I wanted or not relationship. Um, so one day we're at the grocery store, and we were going to a friend's house. So he's on one side looking for something, and I'm on the other side looking for something. We were supposed to meet at the register. So my father who has the transition, and he used to whistle my name in a specific way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember asking my dad, because I, like you say, I continue and could communicating with my dad. But I had asked my dad, well, if you don't think this guy is good for me, kick him away. I'm looking things and I'm with the art, and so his whistle. I'm like, and I had during that week asked my dad, shoo him away if he's not a good guy for me. And I'm like immediately like frozen. I haven't heard this whistle for a decade, or
Mm-hmm.
and then I heard it again, and then I see him coming, and he whistles to me. I started crying. And he's like, what happened? What did I do? I'm like, you have no idea. And I hugged him, and I knew back then um, that he was okay for me.
Hmm.
But these little signs, if it would have been another day, if it would have been probably at the party, I would have probably not even paid attention to it or even thought about it. So I think that also the signs come to us at a specific moments, and we need to open our senses to what the universe and what our guides, what the spirits, what God has to show us.
Once we open ourselves up to the idea that we live in a multidimensional universe, that maybe the jump between life and death isn't as great as we think, and we open ourselves up to the wonders and the mystery of the universe, we become more open to communications from our loved ones. And I always tell individuals who, you know, there are some going to be skeptical. Obviously, if you talk about signs and be so grounded in this real world experience that they don't their head for whatever reason won't go to something beyond that. Like me, that when I was like me in the beginning of and um, but we can't consensually validate somebody else's experience. Well, what I can do is find out what that experience did for you. Did it? What was the transformation in your mood and your demeanor after you experienced a sign from your loved one? How can you use that information to help you move through grief? And it's not about whether or not I believe your experience. It's about, okay, let's talk about the experience moving forward, how we you can use that to integrate that into
Mhm.
your philosophy to move through grief and peace and acceptance that my world is going to be the way it is without the physical presence of my loved one, but I'm still going to re-engage in life and find meaning regardless.
Yes, it's. I believe that once you see that they and you understand that they are there, you feel relief because you know they try to connect with you in different ways, letting you
Hmm.
know, okay, first, and second, that you need to be okay too.
Yep. And I think eventually you begin to learn that sometimes at the beginning of grief, if we get a sign, it's a reminder of who we lost. But then in later grief, as we come to peace and acceptance with what's happened, that sign is a reminder of what we already have. And we have
Yes.
that ongoing relationship. Relationships don't die because of physical body. Relationship, we can transform those relationships. We can create continued bonds with our loved ones. We can integrate the best parts of who they are into the best parts of who we are. And that redefines our life narrative going forward. And we can move through not only with a redefined narrative, but with a redefined purpose and and redefined meaning.
Yes. And also, I think that also it shows during the process, the before and after, the transitioning of our loved one. One of the things that I noticed with my father is that years later, I was like, oh, so everything happened this way because later on, the thing needed to happen.
Mhm.
And this over here couldn't happen before. It had to happen after my father and
Yeah.
you know, and different connections, different things that happen during that time. People coming to us and telling us so many beautiful things about our father. Um, and then years and years later, learning about other people that he knew, things like that we are like, oh, this is happening now. It didn't happen during the funeral because there is a greater focus on this.
Mhm. And one of the things that you mentioned is that, and I heard you say that you also had to look back at your past a little bit too, after your father transitioned. And one of the things is that I think the transition of our loved ones demand that we do is we look at our past. One of the things that exposed me to was Native American teachings of animals and nature, and specifically the work of Jamie Sams and Ted Andrews, both of whom have transitioned. Jamie Sams and David Carson wrote a book called Medicine Cards, and Ted Andrews wrote a series of books, but the one that I always recommend is Animal Speaks. And in the Native American tradition, everything has a spirit. Everything has something to teach us. Our animals, the trees, the water, rocks, everything has a spirit that needs to be revered, needs to be respected, needs to be honored. And Patty exposed me to crow medicine, and then I don't know if your viewers will be able to see, but in the background there's a crow. And I took that picture for Utica University, just uh, hanging out magnificently with just
Yeah.
watching the sure for his other corvid. Um, and one of the with crow teachings, it's crow is honor the past as your teacher, honor the as your creation, and honor the future as your inspiration. So I had to look at my past and not stare at it, not have any regrets at to see because every decision I dictated what I did in the present. And looking at gave me some clarity to my presence, the future that I co-create with in honor of and co-create it with the universe. So crow medicine helped me take a look at all of that. And the work that I did with Patty, with Janine, and with crow medicine also allowed me to look back at at the relationship that I had with my father, who left me when I was 5 years old, and, and with my mother, who was overprotective to the point where it angered me. Um, but crow medicine and Patty's teachings allowed me to take a look at those instances differently, where I learned to understand why my mother became overprotective. And my father's leaving was them, but it was an act helped me to really form the relationships that I had, when I was
Yes.
60 years old with my father and my mother. So all of it that I did with Janine just had a trickle down effect with all of the past and present relations.
Like today we see these transitions of being more empathetic, more compassionate, compassionate
Yep.
uh, through others, with others, and also more understanding
Yes.
of different to other people.
Maritza, comparison and empathetic person, I think that was a product of the characteristics that I cultivated that I already had probably as a therapist. But after Janine transitioned and with the support I got from so many people, with the work that Patty did with me, very selflessly did with me, um, that opened up a portal of compassion and empathy that I did that took that another step. The sadness that I experienced with my daughter's transition turned into extreme compassion for others who had experienced tragedy, or just for my students, many of whom have their own challenges. Maybe doing something like holding a door open, ask them how their day was beyond school. That has made a difference. So, and I've also, you can never tell what another person is dealing with. So, just act out of love and compassion as opposed to the opposites of those lack of understanding, things of that nature. Um, we're all We're all connected by a single thread. We're all made out of the same DNA of the human race. So together with the mess, passion, and understanding, and see similar difference. That's the other thing that I've also learned is that I don't grieve the same way. Everybody grieves differently, but the way you grieve and the way I grieve works for us. So who am I to say that you're not as good as mine? My job is to create and maybe learn something.
Exactly. That when we understand, when we go through pain, we understand others better.
Hmm.
But not necessarily we need to go through painful situations in order to be empathetic in it. It is something that we can create in our lives as a daily reminder of where we come from.
Yeah, and I mean, grief due to death isn't the only way we can cultivate compassion. I mean, there are other losses that and other setbacks that we are going to experience in life that we can take a look, reflect, and say, okay, how can I find meaning out of what happened? How can I become more compassionate? How can I can become more understanding? How can I become a better person as a result of the challenges that have befell me?
Exactly. And then another thing is to think, okay, I am experiencing this. How many people around the world that experiencing these same things and I don't know about?
Mhm.
They don't talk about it.
Yeah, some people have difficulty accepting support, asking for help. It's somehow in like Western society, asking for help has become kind of a stigma. And for some people, particularly those that are dealing with mental health issues, when in reality, no person is an island. We can't exist without support, human contact. We can't solve all of our problems ourselves. We can choose the path that we walk as a choice, but we can't by ourselves. We need to have support. We need to have and to empower us to create the life of our choosing.
Exactly. Our world will be a better place if we all were more compassionate, more empathic, and we were more of others.
Yep. Particularly these very polarizing times right now.
Exactly. Well, Dave, we are getting close to the end of our episode, and I would love to give you the opportunity to share with the audience where and how they can find you if they would like to contact you.
Well, probably would go to my website, which is davidrobertsmsw.com. Under contact, you'll see my email address. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Go to Patty's and Mind Applied Psychology Professor and Minister.com. There's another email specifically that you can use, particularly if you have questions about you want to find out Patty. Yeah, Patty and I can services as far as spiritual counsel, spiritual counseling, things of that nature. Patty is certified counseling. You know, she got her degree or her interface or degree or certificate conferred on her by the in New York, and so she is a counselor. So you can contact services that way. Just want just general bereavement support. Either one of those two websites or email addresses will do. And I'm not hard to find. I'm not hard to find. Until the universe or God or whoever we believe in as our higher power calls me to my next assignment, I'm going to be around for um, as long as the universe deems necessary for me to do what I was put to do on this earth. So
Yes, exactly. I love. Thank you so much, Dave, for this time. It was beautiful. Thank you because it brought back a memory that I have put in the in the little trunk of memories. Thank you so much for your time.
you're welcome, Maritza, and thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I enjoyed our conversation today.
Yes, me too. Would you like to leave the audience with a last thought?
Boy, my brain's running through several last thoughts, but the thing is, I tell individuals, show grace to yourself, particularly very challenging times. A lot of times we have guilt and we blame ourselves for things that were out of our control. Show grace to yourself. Understand that you didn't have any control over the hand of cards that was dealt. And when you look back or you look in the present, realize that you're doing the best you can do at this point, given the hand of cards that have been dealt. And that if you keep moving, you'll get through grief.
I love that. Show yourself grace. I love it. Thank you so much, Dave. It's wonderful. I loved our conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure, Maritza. I wish you peace.
Me too. And to our audience, thank you so much for being with us today. And remember, you were brought to this world because the greatest source, God, loved you to be loved and love one another. Till next time. Bye. Hi, it's Maritza here. If you like this episode of My Accent is No Accident podcast and would like to listen more like this, subscribe wherever you're listening to it or watching it. Leave us a nice review and share with your friends, family, and network. Thanks for listening.